Johnny and I are here in my dining room, and I'm doing something that I've wanted to do for a long time. I have heard so many of my adult friends say, I wish I had asked my parents and grandparents more questions about their parents and grandparents, and I've often wished that too. But I do have pretty much information, and so now I'm going to pass on what I have to you, my darling children, and my best friend Benji. So you'll never have to wonder. I'll start with my grandparents and Dad's grandparents and continue with major events in our very own family up to the present time. Then you're on your own. I wish I didn't have to read so much of this, but I don't want to miss anything. My mother's father and mother were both from Szombathely, Hungary, and were distantly related. When my mother's father, my grandpa, came to the United States, he got in touch with his relatives, and they were very hospitable to him, and eventually he married their daughter, Hermine. His full name was Isaac Mayer Markowitz, and her name was Hermine Markowitz, but they were known as Max and Minnie. My grandpa went into the tailoring business and apparently was moderately successful because they lived nicely and had 5 daughters, Fanny, Clara, Rose, Pearl, and Isabel. Fanny married Ben Gurion. They were divorced, and then she married Bill Sherman, and they went into the restaurant business. They had restaurants called Fan and Bill's in New York City, in Glens Falls, New York, in Washington, and in Miami Beach, and that one was wildly successful. Clara married Victor Walsbrook, had one son, Irwin, who had one son, Stephen, and they're all gone. They divorced, and then she married Mike McFader. Rose married Harry Gluckman, a very nice, ineffectual man. But Ira and I just loved him because he used to tell us the Willie stories. They had no children. He had several different unimportant jobs and taught piano on the side, but he wasn't a fine pianist. They lived in Brooklyn, and after my grandmother, my Nana, but I was only 3 when she died, and unfortunately, I do not remember her. But after she died, my grandpa moved in with Rose and Harry. Then on July 12th, 1895, along came Pearl, your Nana, the pearl of the family. She always said she was the ugly duckling, but she grew to be a very attractive young woman and a stunning middle-aged woman with a sparkling personality. She was the personification of the expression joie de vivre, which means joy of life or joy of living. Fanny's first husband introduced her to Ben Katz. And they had a courtship of about 2 years and then got engaged. Your Nana had to lend Pop the money for a diamond ring, which kept growing as Pop got more successful, into a 12-carat diamond ring. Pop traveled a lot on business, so they were often separated. But I would like to tell you a funny story that occurred during their courtship. They were getting pretty serious, so Nana invited Pop to her parents' house for dinner. Pop was very fastidious, and on his business trips he ate in all kinds of restaurants. So out of habit, he wiped off his silverware on his napkin before eating. Well, you can imagine how insulted my Nana was. But she forgave him, and they were married December 22nd, 1918. I'll give you some information about Pop's family as soon as I finish the Markowitz girls. The first 4 girls were born 2 years apart, and then came Isabel 8 years after Pearl, maybe an afterthought. She was the real beauty of the family, with long dark curls. She probably was spoiled and overprotected because with 4 older sisters, it was like having 5 mothers. She married a man named Sam Nauer, and they moved to Vienna, where he was working on a PhD. The marriage fell apart, and she came back to the United States and moved in with Rose, Harry, and Grampy. She soon started working as a costume jewelry buyer and later a merchandise manager at several different department stores. Lived alone some of the time and some of the time with us. I still have some of the costume jewelry that she got for me. You children called her Aunt Bo, which is what I called her, but Dad called her Izzy. She was always a part of our lives, and as you know, became much more so. Now to give you some background on my father, your Pop. His parents, Morris and Sadie Katz, were both born in a little town in Austria. His father came to New York in 1900 when Pop was 8 years old. And after about a year, he saved enough money to send for his wife and 4 children, Pop, and the eldest, and 3 sisters, Bessie, Lee, and Clara. They had to take a train to Rotterdam to catch the ship, but by the time they reached Rotterdam, I don't know what means of transportation they had. The ship had left and they were stranded with the tickets for the ship but very little money. So Pop, at the age of 9, took charge. Got a job helping a man with a pushcart selling food, and he was paid very little money, but at the end of each day, the man gave him the food that was not sold. I don't know how long they had to stay in Rotterdam, but eventually they arrived in New York and were reunited with their father and husband. Pop's father had opened a meat market, but his earnings were small, so 9-year-old Pop managed to get a job before and after school. He delivered milk at 5 o'clock in the morning and sold newspapers for just a few cents after school. He was beginning to learn to speak English and managed to complete 8 grades of public school in 3.5 years. He was smart. And he then started out in the real business world. He worked for Willoughby Camera Suppliers in New York, and he did some prize fighting also. He was a bantamweight. He then opened the Empire Photo Company, then became a salesman and then general manager.
Wasn't there a story about him selling a newspaper, an old newspaper?
Yeah, do you want to hear that
Sure.
story? Okay. He used to buy the newspapers for 2 cents and sell them for 3 or 4 cents, I don't know. And he saw a man one day offering the newspapers for 1 cent. At this point, he didn't know English, so he thought, it's a bargain, I can make more money selling my papers. So he bought several of them, sold them, and the next day some man came over and started to beat him up. He had sold him a day-old newspaper, but Pop didn't know English at that point, so he did not know. At any rate, his business career was much more successful. Then a salesman and general manager and vice president of Dinhofer Jewelry Manufacturers. He must have liked that work, because in 1921, he and his friend Ben Ogish, with Ben's brother Billy, opened Katz and Ogish Jewelry Manufacturers, and they were very successful. They even sold watch cases to the Gruen Watch Company. A few more words about his family. His father died quite young. I never saw him, I was just a few months old. His sister Bessie married Sam Abramson, had 2 children, Marcia and Jerry. Lee married Joe Eisenberg, had no children, and they lived with Grandma Katz, who was a wonderful lady. My mother loved her, and so did we. Clara married George Perryman. They had 2 girls, Gloria and Elaine. Elaine passed away a couple of years ago, and I'm still in touch with Gloria. George was wonderful, very smart and good looking. He was a pioneer in the radio tube business. invented the machine that made Dr. Scholl's corn plasters, and was the first person to make ping pong paddles, rubber ping pong paddles. He formed the Tatco Table Tennis Corporation, was very successful. We always had good ping pong tables, table tennis tables we learned to call them. He also, in his youth, won the 50-yard dash in the Olympics, or so he told us, but I don't think he would lie. And I think I'll tell you the funny story about him and Grandma Katz. They had a very nice relationship, and one day he called her on the phone. She said, "Hello, hello," and he said, "Hello, Mother, this is George." She said, Who? He said, "Mother, it's George Perryman." She said, "You'll have to speak louder." He said, "Mother, it's George Perryman, Clara's husband." She said, "One more time, please." And he said, "Mother, it's George the Goy." She said, "Oh, George, my boy, I'm so happy to hear from you." That was a good family story. Now back to Pearl and Ben, now referred to as your Nan and Pop. They were living comfortably in Brooklyn. Ira was born January 26, 1921, and I was born April 28, 1923. Aunt Rose had no children of her own and was beside herself with joy. She helped my mother as much as she could. She was much more proficient at it than my mother, I gather. And especially, she was thrilled to have a little girl to make dresses for. She made my clothes for years. And she tried to teach me how to pronounce Katz. I couldn't say it. I kept saying my name was Marilynn Katz. So her method was this. Now say Katz. And I always said Tats. I can say it now. I was only about 2. Pop was doing very well and wanted to surprise Nan for some occasion, so he bought a brand new Buick car. There were very few cars on the road in those days. On the way home, he had an accident. So his gift to his beloved wife was a bashed up new car. I must mention that my parents had a wonderful, happy, loving marriage that Dad and I were lucky enough to emulate. When I was 4 years old, we moved to Larchmont, to a wonderful house with a 2-story living room with lots of ground for swings, slide, and a gazebo. Nan and Pop bought a piano, and I started taking piano lessons when I was 5. Aunt Rose felt deserted because we were far away from her, but they managed to come up often. They didn't have a car, so they took a train, and either Nan or Pop would meet them at the station. And then, when Nan and Pop took long trips, they moved into our house and took care of Ira and me. The Gruen Watch Company was in deep trouble and had fallen into the hands of the banks. I guess that's what you call bankrupt. This was in Cincinnati. The banks contacted Pop and offered him the job of pulling the company out of bankruptcy. He became president, brought in some capable men, and after 18 months, this paid money dividends to the stockholders. There was a wonderful article in Time magazine about how successful he was. It was a difficult adjustment for all of us. The Gruen brothers and the board of directors were not too receptive to this Jewish man from New York who made a success of their failure. But eventually we all adjusted. Nan and Pop traveled to Bienne, Switzerland, and that's when, because that's where the Gruen plant was, and that's when Omri became a part of our lives. We lived at the Netherland Plaza Hotel while Nan looked for a house. When she couldn't find one that they both liked, we moved to the Belvedere Apartments, and that's where I met Margie Lyon Groden, who also became a lifelong friend. Ira and I started Walnut Hills High School when we were still at the Netherlands, and we were sent to school every morning in a taxi cab, and that embarrassed us. So we used to get out of the cab a block from the school and walk the last block or two, so nobody, though some did, but nobody, we thought, saw us get out of the taxi. We had had a wonderful dog in Larchmont, Queenie, who stayed with Aunt Bo when we moved. And once we were settled, she drove our car and Queenie to Cincinnati, a 2 or 3 day trip then, a happy reunion, and Aunt Bo stayed with us for several years. Shortly after she got there, my grampy died. I had started going to Camp Hiawatha the year before we moved and continued for 6 more years. I was never very athletic, and I always said I'm the only one I know who could go to camp for 7 years and be good at nothing. But I was the song leader. And that's where I made 3 lifelong friends, June, Ann, and Sue. June later became Steve's godmother. After I graduated from Walnut Hills, we took a 6-week trip west, starting at Banff and Lake Louise in Canada. I couldn't wait to get to Los Angeles because I was such a movie fan. Pop knew lots of people. We met the Warner Brothers and the Marx Brothers. Nan was a big fan of Clark Gable, and one night we were in a very famous restaurant, and in walked Clark Gable and Spencer Tracy. Well, we were all excited, but Nana was beside herself and a little embarrassed by it, so she kept saying, "I'm so excited for Marilynn." Ira was at the University of Michigan and later at Harvard Business School, and I went to Randolph-Macon Women's College in Lynchburg, where I found another lifelong friend, Ruth Eckstein Goldman, from Springfield, Illinois. By then, Nan and Pop had moved to their beautiful home in Indian Hill. One weekend, I went up to Ann Arbor to visit Ira, and I saw that there were boys there. So I transferred my sophomore year to the University of Michigan, and I loved it. I had a good voice teacher, a wonderful French class, many French classes, and even studied Italian. And best of all, I got to know Dad's cousin, Miriam Tobin, which led to my meeting your dad, the best thing that ever happened to me. That was shortly after December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor Day, and that affected everyone's life. Before I go on, I'll give you the history of Dad's family, with a pause for a drink of water. I found among Dad's things an article from some kind of a publication. Some lady had written this publication, whatever it was, and asked if the editor knew anything about the name Brewda, if he knew about the origin. And this is what he found out. Braude is a Russian form, Braude is a Russian form of the name Braude, a celebrated and widespread Jewish family name. The name is of geographical origin, derived from the town of Brud, which is situated in Moravia, Czechoslovakia. Dad always told me it was in Latvia, and I believe him. The first ancestor to bear that name was of Rabbi Abraham Braude, who held the rabbinical seat of Prague, Metz, and Frankfurt, and died at the age of 67 in 1717. He was a native of Brugge. His descendants included a large number of rabbis and scholars. The name is spelled in a variety of ways: Our Way, Broda, Broide, and others. The family ranks high in the lists of Jewry, having intermarried with many of the leading families of many European countries. Dad's paternal grandfather, Abraham Samuel Braude, was born in Russia in 1845. He studied and became a rabbi and served in Mitau, Latvia, until he came to Chicago in 1891 to lead an Orthodox synagogue on the southwest side of the city. He was well known for his scholarliness and for his many involvements in the community. That's just a clock. It won't stop us. He died in 1907, and according to an article in the Chicago Yiddish newspaper, which Dad had translated at a nickel a word, and hundreds of dollars later we found out there were 10,000 people at his funeral, and the wooden sidewalk broke under the weight of the funeral procession. His wife's name was Hassa, and their children were Emil, married to Annie, Paul, married to Sarah, John, married to Sadie, Sophie, married to Sam Ginsberg, Adolf, married to Irene, Benjamin, married to Lillian, Annie, married to Charles Rosengard, and of course your grandfather, Morris, married to Dorothy Rosenstein. Adolf and Morris were twins. All the brothers were in the jewelry family, except Benjamin and Morris, who were physicians. Ben's daughter and son-in-law are Claire and Dr. Norm Sherman, whom you certainly, they're dear friends of mine, and you certainly must remember them. Claire has a sister, Charlotte. She had a sister, Charlotte. She died just a few days ago, and had a brother, Abraham Isaac, a doctor. Both he and Dad and another cousin were named for their grandfather. Morris Braude, your grandfather, I hope you remember him, went to Rush Medical School in Chicago, part of the University of Illinois, and became a psychiatrist and a professor of psychiatry at Rush. He wrote and published 4 books: Life Begins, Scriptural Psychiatry, Clinical Psychiatry, and Conscience on Trial, all about as readable to the layman as are Steve's books, of which I'm so proud, even if I can't understand them. I do like to point to them. Dad's mother's parents immigrated from Lithuania and settled in Mishawaka, Indiana. They were Simon and Sarah Rosenstein, also Orthodox Jews and very religious. You can imagine what a blow I was to them. They went into the scrap business, Simon Rosenthal and his sons, and was very successful. Their children were Louis, married to Sylvia, Annie, married to Harry Cohn, Abraham, never married, Harry, married to Eve, Zilpa, my favorite, married to Jack Tobin, and Minnie, married to Louis Tobin, Jack's brother, Dorothy, your grandmother, and Esther, married to Irving Goldblatt. Dorothy and Morris were married in 1913, I think. Faye was born September 18th, 1915, and Dad was born September 18th, 1919, on Yom Kippur. So there was 4 years difference. And Danny was born in 1924. Faye married Jack Lasine, and their children are Arlene Stewart and Dear Dottie, born after Grandma Braude died at the age of 59, and therefore given her name. Danny married Leonore Leff, who got Alzheimer's disease by the time she was 60 and died in 1992. I hope you all remember Anne. She was adorable. As you know, their boys are Irwin, Teddy, and Jerry. Danny married Nori, I think in 1993, whom we all welcomed warmly into the family. Dad went to high school in Chicago, then to Northwestern University briefly, and the Sherwood Music School, and studied singing with Rosa Raiza and her husband Giacomo Rimini, but all of this was interrupted by his being drafted into the Army. Here's where our stories come together. Miriam Tobin, now Gottlieb, and I lived in the same house. It was sort of a small dorm at Michigan, and she often heard me sing and always said, "You have to meet my cousin. He sings too." When Dad was about to go into the Army, he went to Detroit to say goodbye to his aunts and uncles. the Tobins, and Miriam was there and told him, "This girl you have to meet." So while he was in Detroit, he called me in Ann Arbor and made a date. He came to Ann Arbor and took me to dinner. I can't say it was love at first sight, but I remember every detail about that evening. Dad was sent to Texas for basic training, then to OCS, Officers Candidate School, in Miami Beach, and Clark Gable was his upperclassman. Man, I was so thrilled. And all this while, we wrote letters to each other. I even sent him cookies. That's what girls did in those days.
Who made them?
I made them. But it wasn't easy because Betty, do you remember Betty? She looked like Mammy Yoakum and she was Nan and Pop's cook for 20 years.
Betty Schmerich.
Betty Schmerich. And she ran that kitchen with an iron hand. So I had to do it on her day off. I got the recipe from the mother of a good friend of mine. Steve and Margie certainly must remember Betty. But you do too?
I know of her.
Yeah. After Dad graduated from OCS as second lieutenant in the Army Air Corps, he was sent to Milwaukee to be part of the Midwestern Flying Training Command at Milwaukee State Teachers College. He phoned me in Ann Arbor and invited me to come to Chicago for the weekend and go to an opera. I tried to phone my parents who were in Florida, but it was wartime and it was very difficult to get long-distance calls through. So I never reached them, but I decided to go anyway. Ira was in Chicago at Naval Training School, and Ruth Eckstein had transferred, when I transferred to Ann Arbor, she had transferred to the University of Wisconsin. So I called both of them, arranged for them to have a date, which they had done before, and we arranged to stay at Ruth's sister's house. She lived right outside of Chicago. But Ruth's sister's son got mumps, and so we couldn't stay there. And Ruth and I decided it would be okay for us to stay at a hotel, which we did. Well, I took the train to Chicago. Dad met me at the train, took me to the hotel to get rid of my bags, and then took me to dinner and to a marvelous performance of Traviata. By the end of that evening, I knew he was the man for me. We had 2 more weekends in Chicago. Nan and Pop came to Chicago to meet him and his parents, and a weekend in Milwaukee so I could see where I was going to live, and 1 weekend in Ann Arbor, and my parents came also. And our 7th date was our wedding.
How'd that work out?
You tell me.
Very well. How did he propose?
I never told you that. We were sitting,
This would be the good time.
we were sitting in a restaurant, and I said to him, there are a lot of rumors going around that you and I are engaged. And I'm trying to discredit them. He said, don't. I would like us to be. I said, but you never told me you loved me. He said, well, that's hard for me to say, but I do and I want to marry you. That was the weekend my parents were in Chicago. And I told them the next day that I was engaged. And my mother's first question was, what's this kosher business? But I'll go into that later. We were married July 18th, 1943, and I don't have to tell you how that turned out. There was one minor hitch. I was finishing my junior year at Michigan, and the day before I was to take my final exams, I got measles. So I ended up in the contagious ward. Nan and Pop came up to Ann Arbor to take me home. My professors let me take my exams in the contagious ward, and needless to say, I passed. The war, of course, was still going strong. This was 1943, but Dad requested a week's leave from the Army Air Corps, so we had a honeymoon in northern Michigan, and then settled into a little apartment in Milwaukee. 2 days later, Dad got orders transferring him to another flying training school in Superior, Wisconsin, which when we got there, we lovingly called inferior Wisconsin. That sounds like Dad, doesn't it? Dad's cousin, Dr. A. Braude, married a girl from there. That was Claire's brother. And his wife lived there while he was in the army. She was staying with her parents. So we did know somebody there, and it wasn't bad at all. I took a course at the college where the training school was. After 3 months, Dad was transferred to the Western Training Command, and we were sent to Oxnard, California. We had never heard of it, but off we went by train. Oxnard was a terrible town, and after one night at a terrible hotel, we went to a neighboring town, Ventura, to look at it, and got an apartment there, and loved it there. We met so many nice people, and enjoyed the beach, and I played bridge with the other officers' wives. None of the officers at that training school lived in Oxnard. And there we met other lifelong friends, Norma and Bob Wells, whom we visited when we took that California trip. I hope you have some memory of them. Then Dad was chosen to go to Adjutant General School. So I had to come home with great difficulty. I had to take a taxi to Needles, California, and pick up the super chief. And in a day and a half, I got changing in Chicago. I got to Cincinnati to stay with Nan and Pop. But my friend Norma Wells was going to, Bob by then was getting ready to go overseas, and Norma was going also east to see Bob, so she and I traveled together, and it made it pleasant. When Dad finished that training, he got orders to Lancaster, California, in the middle of the Mojave Desert. It wasn't bad. A lot of our Ventura friends were there too. Our biggest problem was refrigeration. We didn't have refrigerators, we had ice boxes. And Dad had to buy the ice on his way home from where the base was in Palmdale, California, about 20 minutes from Lancaster. So he would buy a 50-pound hunk of ice, and by the time he brought it home in the hot desert, it was about 30 pounds, but it lasted a few days. Our houses, our little houses, were very primitively air-conditioned, but we survived. The next transfer was to Las Vegas, and by then, Dad was a first lieutenant, and I was pregnant. Even then, Las Vegas was an exciting place, but we had one very unpleasant experience. What is now the Strip had 2 famous hotels and lots of motels, really quite nice, and marriage houses. We found a motel, stayed there $3.95 a night, which was the going rate. And one day, after 3 days, and no one had come in to clean or bring fresh linen or empty a wastebasket, I timidly went down to the office and said to the man, asked the man if we were supposed to have maid service. He looked at me and he said, "What nationality are you?" I said, "American of," I lost my timidity. I said, "American, of course. My husband is with the United States Army Air Corps." He said, "I mean, are you a Hebrew?" I said, "That's my religion. Why?" He said, "Because you people expect so much service." Well, I was very upset. And I went to a phone and called Dad. There was no telephone there, but there were public phones. Phone booths, remember phone booths? And I called Dad at the base, and he came and rescued me. We paid our bill, checked out, found another motel, and eventually found a very nice place to live. We had primitive air conditioning there too, but I was very comfortable. I joined the Officers' Wives Club and ran into some more anti-Semitism, so I stopped going. But I'd have had to stop anyway, because Steve was born April 17th, 1945. Nan had come, and Pop had come to Las Vegas to await the event, and fortunately Steve arrived 2 hours before his due date, and there was great rejoicing. The only sad note was that President Roosevelt, who was in his 4th term as our president, died April 12th, and the country was in mourning. Pop had to go home after I came home from the hospital, 10 days in those days. But Nan stayed on, moved in with us, slept on either a couch or maybe we had a rollaway bed, I don't remember, and helped me take care of my baby. I say helped, but neither Nan nor I knew nothing about taking care of a baby. When Steve cried, we cried. But Nan stayed for about a week, and when she left, Aunt Rose came and stayed 2 weeks and got everything straightened out. Steve thrived. Then Happy Day, the war in Europe was over, VE Day, and BJ followed in August. I thought it was the end of Army life for us, but a few days after VJ Day, Dad got orders to report to Kearns, Utah, which was the overseas replacement depot, and we assumed he was going overseas. We had to pack up, sell our furniture. We had to buy the furniture to get the apartment we had. And Dad left for Kearns, and I had to take the taxi again from Las Vegas to Needles and catch the super chief, which stopped en route to Chicago. Steve and I spent 2 days and a night in a sleeper compartment and changed to a train in Cincinnati and finally arrived in Cincinnati, where Nan and Pop were waiting with open arms. I can still see Nan taking Steve from me and clutching him to her bosom and smothering him with kisses. I lost my place. After a few days in Kearns, Dad phoned me with magnificent news. An officer with more than 50 points could not be sent overseas. Dad had 40 points for days, for
Service time?
for weeks in the Army. 40 weeks or 40 months. I think it was for months in the Army. And another 12 points for having had a baby before VE Day. So he was then sent back to Las Vegas. Nan and Steve and I took a plane and flew to Las Vegas, where Dad had a little house and a used car, not in great shape, waiting for us. We were there for about 3 months, and then in December 1943, Dad was separated from the service. They never called it discharged. We spent a couple of days in Chicago with Dad's parents, and something very special happened. Danny was home. He had been overseas, and I was meeting him for the first time. One evening, Dad and Grandma Braude and I were in the dining room feeding Steve in a high chair she had for him, and Danny was in the living room playing the violin. Steve had a mouthful of food, stopped chewing, got tears in his eyes, and didn't move. Grandma Braude said, "I guarantee you that boy is going to be musical." How do you like that? Dad had been offered a job with a furniture manufacturing firm in Chicago, but my father made him an offer he couldn't refuse. And we settled in Cincinnati, and Dad became a Gruen salesman with a choice territory, Cincinnati and southern Ohio. Dad and I both started studying singing at the Conservatory of Music. I soon caught up with some of my old friends, and Dad fit in perfectly. And to make sure we stayed close, Pop bought us our first house, less than a mile from his house. That was hard to refuse, too. But it was lovely. Margie was born there October 6, 1947. By then, Ira and Joan had married, and our family was growing. On a sad note, Grandma Braude died and Grandma Braude got very sick and died the day Margie was born. And we had sadness mixed with our joy. Grandpa Braude came to visit the day I came home from the hospital with Margie. So it was a little hectic, but we managed. I started keeping kosher as soon as we had moved into our own home. And I really hated it because I had no experience with it. It was foreign to me. But we did it so that Dad's parents could come and visit us and eat in our house. I like to say that I made our meals so terrible that Dad thought it was his idea that we stop keeping kosher. But I just say that to be funny. We both stopped after Grandma Braude died. And then I just bought kosher meat when Grandpa Braude came to visit. I never cheated on him. But he never asked any questions. But still, I never cheated. By then, he had bought a house in Chicago with Faye and Jack, and they lived together with Arlene, Stuart, and dear Dottie, who was born soon after Grandma Braude died and was named for her. Steve went to nursery school in Marilynn for several years. Margie did for a short time. But by the time Steve was ready for real school, we realized there were absolutely no other Jewish people in the area. And we wanted our children to be where there was some diversity and some other Jewish kids. So we sold our house and bought and remodeled a wonderful old red brick house on Rose Hill Avenue, 4032 Rose Hill. Feel free to go and look at it anytime you want. Steve went to North Avondale School and Margie to nursery school at the Jewish Center. There were lots of kids in the neighborhood. And on April 8th, 1951, Johnny was born and our family was complete. He was everyone's darling. When Steve was 3, he started playing the piano and was soon playing music from the records we had and music for parts of the music that he heard Dad and I were singing. He started piano lessons at the age of 5 and has been playing the piano and enjoying music to the fullest ever since. Grandma Braude was right. Life was good. Dad and I did some traveling, and whenever we went away for a long time, I mean a couple of weeks, Aunt Rose came and stayed with you children and really took over. Aunt Rose told me that one time when she and the kids were on their way to meet us at the airport, Margie kept saying to her, "You not the boss no more." Margie started at North Avondale School, had lots of friends, and all was well. Then Nana had a mastectomy, which was very upsetting to all of us, but the prognosis was good. She had a good recovery and continued to have a busy life. In February of 1954, Dad sang as a soloist with the Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra and got rave reviews in the newspapers. I have them. And even got fan mail. I have that too. He sang with the symphony twice more, but not at music hall. I was so proud, as always. Later that year, Pop and his board of directors at Gruen had an unpleasant disagreement, and Pop decided to sell his interest in Gruen and look for another business to buy. He was very involved in the community and highly respected for his achievements, so I never thought we'd leave Cincinnati. But after much searching, the family bought the Hartman Luggage Company, and we all moved to Wisconsin. Ira and Joan and their 4 kids, they just had Jamie, Ellie, Benji, and Peter then, moved to Racine, where the factory was. But Nan and Pop and we moved to Milwaukee because we wanted the advantage of a larger city, good schools, a reformed temple, museums, and concerts. We bought a wonderful house, met lots of nice people, and soon felt very much at home. Our close friends were Weezy and Chuck. Weezy was a Hartman. Weezy and Chuck Kahn, and Babs and Ernie Rice, and Elaine and Bob Milstein, who moved there just 6 months after we did. Steve and Margie went to Whitefish Bay School, and as Johnny did after a year or two in nursery school. In 1958, Steve had his bar mitzvah, and we all celebrated with him. Grandpa Braude came up from Chicago, of course, but he would not drive on the Sabbath, and the bar mitzvah was on a Saturday. So he stayed with Wheezy and Chuck walked with him. It was much closer to the temple. Pop had a small heart attack, but recovered nicely. In 1959, we took a family trip to Washington, D.C. in Nana's car because she thought it was safer than our car. I hope you, well, maybe you don't, but I hope you'll remember that we stopped in Cleveland en route and spent an evening with Marge and Bill Groden and their kids, Julie, Meg, and Billy. Do you remember that, Johnny?
Vaguely at best. Was that the trip where I lost my Mighty Mouse doll?
No. Maybe.
Or was that Philadelphia or something?
Yeah,
Remember I had a Mighty Mouse doll?
That was a
and I
different
lost
trip.
it.
And on the way back, we stopped in South Bend and visited with Dad's cousins. About this time, Steve started playing jazz piano after having taken lessons, not in jazz, with Mrs. D, who also taught Margie and Johnny. Then Nana's cancer came back, and Hartman was having labor problems, so Pop decided to move the factory to a place where there were no unions, Lebanon, Tennessee. Eventually, the unions came there too. Dad and I did not want to live in the South. The schools were notoriously bad, and we didn't want private schools. So Dad accepted Mel Dunkelman's offer to go into business with him, JSI, Jerk Socks Incorporated, which they bought from Carolyn's father, and that's when we moved back to Cincinnati, and we were warmly welcomed by our dear friends. We've been in Milwaukee 6.5 years. Before we got settled in our house on Rose Hill, our darling Nana died. One quick word about Vi. She came to work for us in Milwaukee and left her own family and moved to Cincinnati with us and was part of our family. For many years, Johnny was her baby.
There was a great resemblance.
Nan and Pop moved to New York when Nan was so sick because the best hospital for cancer was Sloan Kettering Memorial Hospital. We were still in Milwaukee, and Dad had already started working in Cincy. We were waiting until the school year was over. Pop was alone by then and had Parkinson's disease. So Aunt Bo, who was living in and working in Philadelphia, quit her job, this was after Nan died, and came to New York to take care of Pop. After a year, they got married, and she became Aunt Grandma, and Pop was my Uncle Daddy. It was such a sad time for all of us, and we were so busy getting ready for our big move to Cincinnati. Margie had started going to Camp Nokomis, and Johnny was at Kawaka. Dad flew to Milwaukee and drove Steve, Vi, and me to Cincinnati. We got settled in our newly remodeled house at 4136 Rose Hill Avenue and lived there for 13 years. As soon as we were settled, Dad and I started studying together at the college conservatory, and which became well, I guess it was part of the university then, and our singing became an important part of our lives. At this point, I'm sure you all have your own memories. I had thought I would stop this at this point, but I was encouraged to go on, so I will.
Go on.
So I'll just mention some important events along the way. Steve graduated from Walnut Hills in 1963, and we took a Western trip. Took a train to Chicago and a train to Gallup, New Mexico, where we rented a car. We went to the Painted Desert, Mesa Verde National Park, spent our 20th anniversary in Las Vegas, Nevada, then to Los Angeles, and up the California coast to San Francisco, and flew home from there, and Steve left for Oberlin College. Harriet and Saul Greenberg came into our lives in early September and became a part of our family. Johnny's bar mitzvah was in April 1964, and a lot of our relatives came for the weekend. The Tobins came from Detroit, and as you know, they were Orthodox and kept kosher, so they couldn't eat meat or ride on Saturday. So my friend Ann Ratner, who came, that was Ann Loeb from college, from camp. She came from New Jersey to the bar mitzvah, and she called our kosher relatives the Walkers and the Fishers. I'm sure you can figure out why. In 1964, Pop and Aunt Bo moved to Beverly Hills, California. Pop's Parkinson's was making it difficult for him to get outside, and if they lived in a good climate, that he would be able to not have to stay inside all the time. They bought a house in Beverly Hills, had a swimming pool with a whirlpool put in, and all of you went to visit at one time. Steve and Johnny went together, and Margie went on her own. Margie graduated from Walnut Hills in 1965, went to American University, so it was just Dad and I, John and Vi at home. In 1966, Brad Greenberg was born, and Dad and I became godparents, and Johnny became a babysitter. We had a crib in the house and loved having Brad with us. I think that was the same year that Vi married Pete in our living room. They had an apartment in Walnut Hills, so Vi no longer lived with us, but still came every day, except Thursdays and Sundays. And whenever Dad and I went on a trip, they moved into Vi's room, so Johnny wasn't alone in the house. Do you remember that?
Kind of. I remember Pete.
Of course. By then, our Seders had become a big deal. Harriet's parents, Lorene and Dave, came each year from California. The Rosenbergs from next door came. And as a matter of fact, the Rosenbergs girls all still tell my matzo ball story at their Seders. And we often had 20 people. In April 1967, Aunt Bo had a big 75th birthday party for Pop. And of course, Ira, Joan, Dad, and I went out to Beverly Hills to celebrate with them. Steve graduated from Oberlin in '67. He had gone to London for his junior year, and he went on to the University of Massachusetts for an NEA fellowship and started working on a PhD. I'm not positive about the exact dates of the next events, but I think it was later in 1967 that dear Aunt Bo had surgery and died because the surgeon, a friend of theirs, made a mistake. It was a terrible situation. Pop came to live with us. Dad and I went out to California to close his house and then home to a hectic situation. We had made some changes in the house to accommodate Pop and the daily nurses he had to have by then, and who often didn't show up. I adored my father, but it was a very difficult situation. His Parkinson's disease had worsened, and he was so unhappy. After 6 months with us, Ira and I decided he should go to Nashville and spend 6 months with them. By then, Ira and Joan had 6 kids and 6 dogs, and Pop would not have wanted to live in that house. So they found a hospital-like place for Pop. He was miserable. We went down to see him several times. In 1968, I had a mastectomy, and early in '69, Steve married Jane Applington, and when they came to visit us, they too went down to see Pop. Later that year, Johnny graduated from Walnut Hills High School, and we drove him to Syracuse. By then, I think Papa was back in Cincinnati. It was after his 6 months in Nashville. On the way back, on the drive back, I convinced Dad that we should take a BOAC show tour to London. That it was so reasonable we couldn't afford to stay home. But by then, Pop was back in Cincinnati, and because it was so difficult to get male nurses, we moved him to a place similar to where he had stayed in Nashville. By then, Margie had dropped out of American U and was at home, and Jeff Greenberg was born, and we had another darling grandson.
Jeffrey John Greenberg.
Jeffrey John Greenberg, you're right, and the John was for Johnny. We were planning to all go to London, and it was worrisome about leaving Pop. I'd been going over there every other day, and Dad and on the other days. Pop got sick and couldn't come to us for Thanksgiving. And then my darling father died the day after Thanksgiving. Steve and Johnny were home for Thanksgiving. Margie was home. Aunt Rose came. Uncle Harry had passed away by then, and she was living in Florida alone. And we did take our trip. Steve and Jane, Margie and Johnny, Dad and I, and we had a wonderful time. I think I'll tell you about the Beards.
And tell us about the Beards on the next tape, because it's time to switch tapes. Beard story coming up.
Good. Now to the Beard story. When John and Steve came home for Thanksgiving and for Pop's funeral, they both had beards. So Dad thought it would be fun if he grew one too for the trip. Margie was at home.
Did she grow one?
No, Margie didn't grow one. Oh, Johnny, you are consistent. We swore Margie to secrecy because we wanted it to be a surprise. Well, when we all met at the TWA lounge at, I guess it was Kennedy Airport by then, and I was standing there with a camera to take a picture of the faces of Jane, Steve, and Johnny, and they all looked like that. It was really a shock. Dad shaved his beard off before he came home. He said it itched. We had met the Greenbergs from Chicago the year before, and they were there with Liz, and we all had several meals together. We didn't know then what an important part of our lives Edie and Bert Greenberg would become.
How did you meet them in the first place?
We met them on a trip. In the next few years, Margie worked for Saul Greenberg, who was the assistant rabbi at Wise. The temple was still in North Avondale, so she could walk. And eventually, she went back to UC, graduated from there, and went to the University of Wisconsin to get a master's degree in anthropology.
University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee.
Yes, thank you. That's where she met Eugene Milbauer. Now, Margie, I know you remember this, but I wasn't sure if Johnny and Steve remembered all the details. In 1972, between Christmas and New Year, we all went to Mexico. Johnny, you came a day or two late because you couldn't miss the Super Bowl on television. We spent a week in a villa in Acapulco, rented a station wagon, went to Tasco for 2 days, and then to Mexico City. I hope you all remember that trip.
I do, and I remember that Dad got sick at the end.
Yeah, in Mexico City. It's not difficult. Johnny took the first semester of his junior year at Syracuse University in London, studying international broadcasting and having a good time, traveling in Europe. After he graduated from Syracuse, he came back to Cincinnati. I'm sure he remembers, but I'll remind Margie and Steve and tell Benji that he worked as a disc jockey at WUBE from midnight to 6, was it? And then they gave him a little time for a sports report at 7:30 in the morning. And I listened every morning. I couldn't tell you what it said, but I heard my boy's sound.
Can we back up a second?
Yes.
We forgot that I missed Margie's wedding.
No, I get to that.
Oh, never mind.
I just mentioned that she had met Eugene,
Okay.
but not that they got married yet.
Because I was in college.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I do go, but I said
That's
I'm
okay.
not positive about the dates. And then on TV, or maybe before that, he got a job as an assistant editor at Billboard magazine, where he met Cindy. Correct me if I have the order wrong.
I was at UBE, then started working about a year later at Billboard. And that was in the early 70s, like 73, 74. And then I went to On TV in 81, I think.
Oh, well, I remember you said that Cindy could never remember.
She thought I said something about being a nice Jewish boy at UBE, and she thought something about a Catholic boy at EBN. She got it right.
When Steve finished at the University of Massachusetts and got his PhD, he started working as an assistant professor at the University of Maryland, and he and Jane moved to Columbia, Maryland. Margie and Jean Milbauer got married at our house. Saul Greenberg officiated. Johnny missed the wedding. He was home from college for spring vacation and got an attack of appendicitis and was in the hospital. Margie and Jean divorced after 7 years. Steve and Jean divorced after about 5 years. Harriet and Saul divorced in 75. She married Dennis Weaver in our living room. I sang. In 76, and they divorced in 77. We were afraid all these divorces would discourage Johnny, but happily he and Cindy got married November 3rd in 1979, a big event which continues to make us all happy. In the early 70s, Mel Dunkelman's boys came into the JSI business, and Dad decided it was time for him to leave. I wonder if he knew that they would run the business into the ground, the boys, and they did. So he sold his interest back to Mel, and for several years did business consulting quite successfully. In 1973, he went on the boards of the Opera and Hebrew Union College. He had already become very active in the community and had been president of Wise Temple. And as the years went by, he became more and more active in Hebrew Union College, had an office there, and served a term as chairman of the board. There's a funny story about that too. When he went on the boards of the Opera and HUC, and my father had been on both boards, I said to him one day, wouldn't my father have been proud to know that you're on those boards? And Dad got that cute look on his face, and he said he'd have liked it better if it was Ira. In 1974, we had an empty nest and decided to move to an apartment. We sold our house the day we signed the lease for the apartment and left on a trip to Europe the next day. We lived at the Regency for 7.5 years. Then when the Madison house turned condo and our rent kept increasing, Dad convinced me it would be smarter to own than rent, and after several months of remodeling 2 apartments into one, we moved again, and here I am still. While we were still at the Regency, Aunt Rose died. She was the last of the Markowitz girls. In 1975, I started doing programs for senior citizens. I sang and Emily Adler played the piano. We hadn't really known each other, but became very close friends. We did that for 8 or 9 years, till I had my second thyroid surgery and could no longer sing, and did about 150 programs. We had a funny write-up in the Post after our 100th program. Johnny, do you remember that?
The middle-aged ham and her white-haired accompanist?
That's right.
Yeah, no, I don't remember.
Dad and I were doing a lot of traveling with Edie and Bert Greenberg, Roy and Bess Brown, and in 1976 or 7, Sally and Mel Grinspan joined us, and we became a traveling group. Bess died of cancer, and Roy moved out of the circle. And then the 6 of us visited each other 3 times a year and spent New Year's Eve together for 25 years. Now just Sally and I are left. John and Cindy had been dating for 5 years when they married November 3rd, 1979, at a beautiful wedding in Plum Street Temple, and we all rejoiced with him. By then, John was working full-time for the Reds. Am I right?
No.
No?
I went to work for the Reds in '83.
Oh my.
That's okay.
Strike that from the record.
Stricken.
After Margie and Jean divorced, Margie came back to Cincinnati and started dating Eugene Katona, with whom she lived on and off for 9 years with his daughter Nancy, in Cincinnati and in Key West and back in Cincinnati, where Margie bought stuffed animal crackers. In 1981, we had a 60th birthday for Ira when we lived at the Regency and included all his Cincy friends. Bonita came into our lives in 1981 when Dad was on the opera board and I on the guild board. We met at a party and became instant friends, and now she's a dear friend to all of us. In March of 1983, Dad received an honorary doctorate of humane letters from Hebrew Union College, and we had a lovely celebration. Ira and Joan and Edie and Bert came to celebrate with us. Now, was that the year you went to work full-time for the Reds?
November of '83, I went to work full-time
Okay.
for the Reds.
So, November of 1983, John went to work full-time for the Reds as assistant publicity director. For my 60th birthday, we had a family trip to Epcot, which was rather new then, and I think we all had a good time. Joan and Ira had moved to La Jolla by then, and Dad and I started vacationing there. We used to have to go out in February to Los Angeles for a Hebrew Union College board meeting, so that was a natural place for us to vacation. We didn't vacation in their house. Actually, we started going there before they moved there, though a couple of years later we stayed in their guest house. We met the Romanos when I was doing opera previews for the Cincinnati Opera, and they sent me to Oxford. The rest is history. They're almost like family now. When Margie's store moved to the Kenwood area, she met Kevin, and they married in 1988, and Kevin has become another son. Harriet married Charles in 1983, and he is another very welcome addition to our extended family. In 1989, we had a Braude family reunion here over Thanksgiving weekend. It was great having everyone together. Harriet and Charlie, Brad and Jeff joined us for the last dinner, Skyline Chili in the party room. Steve and Audrey married November 4th, 1990, and of course we all went to Baltimore for that occasion. And they had their pig then, do you remember?
Oh yeah, Hamlet.
Hamlet. Steve had bought a, what kind of
Vietnamese.
a Vietnamese pot-bellied pig.
They were supposed to stay small.
It was supposed to stay limit to 60 pounds, and they had to get rid of it when it hit 160. It wasn't adorable when we
No.
saw it. In April 1991, Dad had a complete physical exam, and a spot on his lung showed up. He had lung surgery, and then in July had complications, fluid and hiccups. It was terrible for Dad and left him weakened, but he gradually recovered after several months of radiation, and we were optimistic. Then I had ovarian surgery in September, but it was benign and I recovered quickly. Danny and Nori were married in 1993, and we welcomed her also into the family. Aunt Lee had been suffering with Alzheimer's, and she died in 1992. In May of 1992, we had a Katz family reunion to celebrate what would have been the year of Pop's 100th birthday. All the Katzes stayed at the Netherland Plaza Hotel, so most of the festivities were there. I'm sure you'll remember. But the one thing I do remember is that the food was not wonderful, and Dad and I were planning our 50th anniversary, and we decided we could not have it there where we had planned to. Do you want to say something?
I do remember, and pardon my honesty, but
I
how
know.
shocked we were when Ira and Joan gave us envelopes and told us to look at them later. And they were sizable checks. Thank you.
Wherever you are. At any rate, that's when we decided to rejoin the club so that we could have our party there. In the summer of 1992, Dad and I took our second opera trip in Italy and met the Aaronsons and became instant friends. They've been a happy addition to my life. In July 1993, we celebrated our 50th anniversary with a wonderful party at the club. I'm sure you all remember what a happy occasion that was, with all our dear friends and so many who came from out of town to celebrate with us. It was a wonderful, memorable weekend, and you, our children, helped make it so. And we were so lucky that the three people who had been our bridesmaids and best man, June, Ruth, and Dexter, were there. 2 weeks later, John and Cindy told us Cindy was pregnant. And I'm trying. And my heart jumped for joy. Can you stop it a minute? Dad and I were in San Francisco for an HUC meeting when we realized he was in trouble again. After several chemotherapy treatments and 2 frantic trips to the Jewish hospital emergency room, that darling, wonderful, I can't do it, adored man died January 7th, 1994. We all have our own individual memories of that terrible time. And I will always remember and be grateful for the wonderful support you kids gave me, and my brother and my dear friends, and have continued to give me. Is it terrible?
No, it's the way it should be.
I somehow managed to live through the next 2 months. And then on March 10th, 1994, Benjamin Abraham Braude arrived and gave me a new lease on life. Just a minute. I know you kids have never seen me cry before.
No, not since commercials.
I think it was 1997 when Judy and I started traveling together after Jeff died. And that has been so good for me. In the next few years, Edie, June, my darling friend since I was 11 years old, and Steve's godmother, Aunt Faye, and Bert died, each one a real loss to me. In 2000, our darling Ira died. I was devastated. And then Mel Greenspan died the next month. There were lots of good things, though, during those years, even before 2000. The birthday parties you children gave me for my 75th and 80th birthdays, for which I'm so very grateful. The trips to Florida to the apartment I rented for 6 or 7 years. Steve and Gina's marriage, another happy addition to our family. The pleasure I've had from Harry and Charlie and their children and grandchildren. My visits with the Aaronsons and Sue and Sally, and the devotion of the Romanos, and my special friends, Judy, Francis, Joyce, Twink, and Muriel. In 2004, we had the Alaska cruise with all the Katzes as Joan's guests. I loved what Benji said when we asked him on the way home what he liked best of the trip. He answered, the cousins. Family trips mean a great deal to me. I think our December 2006 trip to Mexico was enjoyed by all of us. I hope so. I want to make sure you all remember 3 of my favorite Benji comments. When he was about 1.5 years, John and Cindy dropped him off here, and he cried when they left. He was so sad. He was, but I walked around with him, patting him on the back and telling him his mommy and daddy were coming back, and then we were all going to be together. And he finally quieted down, and he sat on my lap, and I read him a book, and Johnny and Cindy came back, and we went out to eat. Perkins pancakes. He was sitting in a high chair, and he looked around, and he said, "I'm happy now." I just have never gotten over that. And then, when he was about 2, when I was over there babysitting, and we were playing with Play-Doh, And he had played with some of the colors, and I said, I'll get you some more colors. What would you like now? And he said, the blue and the orange. Aren't you glad? I
Yay.
said, oh my God, another. Excuse me. And then one more. When Johnny used to drop him off, he would drive around the parking lot, and I would
I would, not Benji.
Yes, and I would lift Benji onto that windowsill where Johnny is sitting right in front of it right now, and we would wave madly. So one time, Benji was getting a little heavy for me. I had a little step ladder there, and I said to Benji, as I helped him up the ladder, it's hard for me to lift you now, Benji, because I'm old. And the next time he came, I had the ladder there, and as he started up the ladder, he turned to me and he said, Nana, you still old? Benji has been such a pleasure for me. I've never stopped missing your wonderful dad, but Benji has been a bright light as a baby, a little boy, and now a teenager. I'm proud of him as I am of all 6 of you. You are the most important part of my life, and I hope and pray you'll always be close to each other. For me, if not for yourselves. I don't know how long I'll be around, but this is where my version of our history stops. Now it's up to you.
And we all thank you for taking the time to do it and do it so well.
I hope.